Now, let us begin. The city of Seoul lay draped in a cold, persistent winter rain, the kind that turns neon signs into watercolor bleeds on the slick, black asphalt. High above this sprawling metropolis, in a penthouse that felt more like a monument to isolation than a home, Junho stood before a wall of glass. He adjusted the cuff of a suit so exquisitely tailored it seemed a part of his very skin. To the world, Junho was the architect of the Shoniel Syndicate, a man whose whispers could shift markets and whose gaze could command armies. His wealth was a fortress, built brick by brick from the cold calculus of the underworld. Yet the man reflected in the rain-streaked window was a ghost, a hollow man wrapped in expensive armor. The silence in his home was an active, oppressive force. It was the anniversary of a choice made long ago, a day he chose power over family, a date that gnawed at the edges of his soul each year. Tonight, the silence was unbearable. He craved noise, life, the messy, chaotic pulse of humanity, even if he could only observe it from a distance. He descended into the city's veins, his black sedan a silent predator parting the sea of traffic. In a move that was uncharacteristically reckless, he dismissed his driver and bodyguards a block away from his destination. For just an hour, he needed to be a man, not a symbol. He walked towards a place called the Golden Hearth, a legendary establishment known not for its Michelin stars, but for its soul. It was a place where the air was thick with the scent of roasting garlic and caramelized meat, and where laughter was the primary soundtrack. It was a sensory assault that stirred a hunger in Junho that was not for food, but for feeling. He stepped inside. The warm, humid air instantly fogged his glasses. A young hostess, her face a mask of focus amidst the Friday night chaos, glanced up. She saw not a kingpin, but an inconvenience, a solitary man in a suit too sharp for the setting, his face an unreadable slate. He was a disruption to her carefully arranged seating chart. "Table for one?" she asked, her tone clipped as her eyes scanned the room, a vibrant tapestry of families shouting over sizzling grills and couples clinking glasses of soju. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her apology a formality. "We're at full capacity. We don't seat single diners at the grill tables during peak hours. There's a bar across the street, perhaps?" The rejection was so mundane, so bureaucratic, that it was utterly devastating. In that moment, he wasn't the head of a syndicate. He was just an unwanted man. He was stripped of his power and left with the stark reality of his life. He had everything, and no one with whom to break bread. He stood frozen, a hot flush of humiliation creeping up his neck. The golden light and joyous noise of the dining room seemed a world away, a paradise from which his own choices had exiled him. He turned to leave, his hand on the cold door handle, ready to retreat into the familiar embrace of his sterile world. He had never called it loneliness, he called it discipline. But in the entryway of this warm, boisterous restaurant, that lie crumbled into ash. Just as he began to push the door open, a voice sliced through the din. It wasn't loud, but it had a clear, melodic quality that seemed to anchor the entire room. "Excuse me, sir." Junho paused, every instinct honed by years of threat assessment firing at once. His hand twitched. He turned, slowly, expecting a challenge. But it was not a threat. It was a woman, seated at a small table by the window. She was African, her skin glowing with a warmth that defied the dreary weather, her hair styled in intricate braids. She waved a hand, not with the frantic energy of someone seeking attention, nor the calculated allure of a courtesan, but with the simple, casual familiarity of a neighbor offering a kindness. This was Amara. At 28, she moved with a quiet grace that spoke of having walked through fires and emerged carrying water for others. She wore a simple yellow sweater that seemed to absorb and radiate all the light in the room. Next to her, A little girl of about 6 watched him with wide, intelligent eyes that seemed to see straight through his hardened exterior. Amara gestured to the empty chair across from her, which was piled high with a coat and a child's backpack. "No need to go back into that rain," she called out, her voice a gentle command that bypassed the hostess entirely. "We have room. The grill is hot enough for 3. The offer was so absurd, so entirely outside the transactional nature of his world, that it left Junho speechless. In his life, kindness was a currency, always attached to a debt or a hidden agenda. He glanced at the hostess, who simply shrugged, relieved to have the problem solved. He looked back at Amara. Her smile wasn't a polite gesture, it was an open door. And for the first time in 20 years, Junho didn't calculate the risk. He didn't weigh the angles. He simply let go of the door handle and walked toward the warmth. Sliding into the booth felt like crossing a border. The small table enforced a proximity that made Junho's heart hammer against his ribs. The radiant heat from the charcoal grill in the center of the table warmed his face, or perhaps it was the unfamiliar sensation of being truly seen. Amara cleared the extra chair with efficient, unapologetic movements. "I am Amara," she said, her voice a rich melody, carrying the lilt of her Nigerian heritage blended with the crisp cadence of a Seoul resident. "And this is my daughter, Sime." Sime did not smile. She studied Junho with the profound intensity of a child who understands that the world is not always a safe place. She held her plastic fork like a tiny scepter, her judgment pending. Junho's body was tense, his hands hidden beneath the table. "June," he lied, shortening his name, stripping it of its power and terror. "I am June." "Well, June," Amara said with a laugh that seemed to vibrate through the table itself, "you looked like you were about to do battle with the rain, and the rain always wins." She didn't ask why a man in a suit that cost more than her rent was dining alone. She simply picked up a pair of tongs and flipped a strip of marinated beef on the grill. The sizzle was violent and beautiful. "Do you eat meat? Or are you a vegetarian who took a very wrong turn?" Her playfulness was a key turning a lock he didn't know was rusted shut. He found himself nodding, mute. She grilled a piece of beef to perfection, placed it on a small plate, and pushed it toward him. It was a gesture of such fundamental maternal care that a lump formed in his throat. He picked up his chopsticks, the metal feeling unfamiliar and heavy in his hand. He took a bite. It was just beef, marinade, and fire, but to Junho, it tasted like a memory of a life he had never allowed himself to live. He watched Amara as the steam from the grill softened the lines of her face. She was not intimidated by his silence, she filled it with her comfortable presence, attending to her daughter, wiping a smudge of sauce from Sime's cheek with a tenderness that made Junho's chest ache with a sharp, specific yearning. He was sitting with a queen, he realized, whose kingdom was this small booth and the little girl beside her. As the meal went on and the bottle of soju was shared, the layers of Junho's armor began to flake away. It wasn't chiseled off by force, but eroded by the gentle, relentless tide of normalcy. Sime, having decided he was not a monster, finally spoke. "Do you have a little girl?" she asked, her voice high and clear. "Simi, eat your rice." Amara hushed her gently, but she didn't scold her. She looked at Junho, her eyes curious. Junho froze. He thought of the relationships he had severed, the choices he had made to ensure no enemy could ever find a leverage point. "No," he said, his voice raspy with disuse. "I have work. A lot of work." Sime nodded with the profound wisdom of a 6-year-old. "My mommy works too. She cleans the big building with the blue lights at night. She says her hands get tired, but she still braids my hair." Junho's gaze fell to Amara's hands. They were strong and capable, but the skin was dry and the knuckles were slightly swollen. They were the hands of a laborer. A sudden, fierce wave of protectiveness washed over him, startling him with its intensity. He looked at his own hands, manicured, soft, stained only by invisible sins. "You work in the Azure Tower?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. It was one of his properties. He did not say this. Amara nodded, taking a sip of water. "Night shifts. It means I can take Sime to school in the mornings." She didn't say it with a hint of complaint. It was a simple fact of her life, a strategy for survival. There was a dignity in her struggle that made all his conquests feel hollow and cheap. He found himself leaning in, genuinely curious, asking about her journey from Nigeria to Korea, about the challenges of raising a child alone in such a homogeneous society. She spoke of hardship and prejudice not with bitterness, but with the quiet strength of someone who knows her own worth. And as she spoke, her eyes locked with his. In the golden, hazy light of the restaurant, something shifted. It was no longer charity or curiosity. It was chemistry. A raw, undeniable spark of attraction arced between the tired single mother and the lonely kingpin. The evening reached its climax, not with a dramatic event, but with the quiet arrival of the bill. The waiter placed the small leather folder on the table. Amara's expression shifted, just for a second, from easy laughter to calculated stress. She reached for her worn purse and began to count out wrinkled bills. Junho watched her, saw the slight hesitation as she did the mental math, balancing tonight's simple joy against tomorrow's necessities. The sight of her counting those bills triggered a violent, protective reflex in him. This was a problem he understood. This was a world where he was king. He didn't just want to pay, he wanted to obliterate the very concept of her struggle. "Stop," Junho said, his voice dropping back into its familiar register of command. He reached into his jacket and produced a card made of black titanium. It was heavy, cold, and absolute. He didn't just place it on the bill, he placed it over her hand, covering her money. "I will take care of this." It was not an offer. It was a decree. Amara looked from the card to his face. The warmth in her eyes cooled. The connection they had built was suddenly severed. She saw the mask slide back into place. "June," she said softly, trying to push his hand away. "You were our guest. I invited you." "It's nothing to me," he said, and the words, meant to reassure, came out all wrong. They sounded arrogant, dismissive of the value of her sacrifice. He leaned in, intent on fixing her life in the only language he knew. "In fact," he continued, the power broker taking over his heart, "I can help you. The building you work in, I know people. I can get you a better job. A day job. I can pay for Simie's schooling. You wouldn't have to count bills like this again." He thought he was being a savior. He was offering her a golden key. He didn't realize he was trying to put her in a golden cage, stripping her of her agency, reducing their sacred, shared meal to just another one of his transactions. He looked at her face, expecting to see relief, gratitude. Instead, he saw a wall go up, a wall of pride so strong that no amount of money could ever breach it. He had shown her his power, and in doing so he had hidden his heart once more. Amara stared at the black titanium card, as if it were a loaded gun. The warmth and laughter of the evening curdled into a rigid, dignified sorrow. She slowly, deliberately, slid his heavy card back across the table. The scraping sound it made against the wood grain was the only noise in the sudden, vast silence between them. "June," she said, her voice quiet but unyielding. "You have mistaken my hospitality for a plea." She picked up her own crumpled bills, smoothing them with a deliberate care that was a statement in itself. I invited you to my table because no one should have to eat alone in the rain. I did not invite you to audition for the role of my savior." Sime, sensing the seismic shift, stopped eating, her eyes darting between her mother's resolute posture and the man who had once again become a stranger. Amara continued, her eyes searching his, looking for the man she had shared a meal with. "For you, money is easy. For me, yes, it is heavy. But it is mine. Every bill is a victory. When you try to buy my struggles, you are trying to steal my victories. I am not a project for you to fix." She stood, gathering her daughter's things with swift, graceful motions. Her rejection was absolute. It wasn't about the money. It was a rejection of his entire worldview. She placed her share of the bill on the table, leaving his portion pointedly unpaid, a final, clear boundary. "Thank you for the company, June," she said, the name now feeling like the lie it was. "But I believe we are finished here." She took Sime's hand, and as they walked away, the little girl glanced back one last time, her expression one of pure confusion. They vanished into the rainy night, leaving Junho alone at the table with his black card, his unpaid bill, and a pile of cold meat. The golden light of the restaurant now felt blindingly, punishingly dim. The drive back to his penthouse was a silent, suffocating blur. His phone buzzed with the endless chatter of his empire threats, reports, deals, but he couldn't bring himself to care. He stared out the window as the city dissolved into gray tears. He entered his apartment, and the perfect, climate-controlled silence screamed at him. For years, he had believed this isolation was the price of greatness. Now he saw it for what it was, a cage. He replayed the dinner again and again. He had treated kindness as a commodity. He had assumed his power gave him the right to dictate another person's life. He had seen her dignity not as something to be admired, but as an obstacle to be removed with money. The hollow ache in his chest was a profound realization. The boss who owned the building had everything, while the woman who cleaned its floors possessed something he could never buy, a soul that was entirely her own. 3 days passed. Junho moved through his life like a phantom. But on the 4th day, the paralysis broke. At 3 a.m, he found himself in the lobby of the Azure Tower. He wasn't there as the owner. He was there looking for a yellow sweater. He found the cleaning crew on the 14th floor. And he saw her. Amara was pushing a heavy industrial floor polisher, her body straining with the effort. She paused to stretch her back, wincing. But then, a coworker said something, and Amara let out that same rich, resonant laugh. A sound of life and defiance in the face of drudgery. Junho retreated before she could see him, his heart pounding. He knew an apology of words would be cheap, and an apology of money would be an insult. He had to speak a different language. He had to speak the language of sweat and service. He did his research, not as a crime lord gathering intelligence, but as a man searching for a path to redemption. He discovered she spent her Saturdays at a dilapidated community center for the children of foreign workers. That Saturday, Junho did not arrive in his black sedan or his Italian suit. He wore work pants and a simple jacket bought from a street stall. Inside the crumbling building, chaos reigned. He saw Amara across the room, trying to organize a mountain of donated coats while Sime clung to her leg. He didn't approach her. Instead, he found the center's overwhelmed director and said quietly, "I'm here to help." He was pointed to the kitchen, where a mountain of dirty dishes sat in greasy, stagnant water. Junho, a man who had ordered men broken for lesser insults, rolled up his sleeves and plunged his hands in. For hours he worked. He scrubbed until his manicured hands were raw. He moved heavy crates. He fixed a broken door hinge. He worked with a silent, ferocious focus, his ego dissolving with every menial task. He was not a boss here. He was just a pair of hands. Late that afternoon, as he was on his knees tightening a loose bolt on a small table in the reading corner, he sensed a presence. He turned. Amara was standing there, holding 2 paper cups of instant coffee. Her expression wasn't angry. It was one of pure, unadulterated shock. She looked at his ruined hands, at the grease smudged on his forehead, and she saw him. Not the powerful man from the restaurant, but just a man, fixing a wobbly table so a child wouldn't fall. "You missed a spot," she whispered, a small, tentative smile touching her lips. Junho stood up slowly, wiping his dusty hands on his pants, feeling more exposed and vulnerable than he had in decades. "The wrench was slippery," he replied, his voice hoarse. She stepped closer, the invisible wall between them gone. She handed him the coffee, and their fingers brushed. The simple warmth of the paper cup was more real and electric than any contract he had ever signed. "Why?" she asked simply. He met her gaze, the truth finally laid bare. "Because you were right," he said. "I don't know how to be a friend, but I am a fast learner. And I wanted to be where the warmth was." Weeks later, the last of the winter chill had surrendered to a fragile spring. The golden hearth was bustling. Junho sat at the same table by the window, but everything was different. He wore a simple sweater, his sleeves pushed up. Across from him, Amara glowed. Between them sat Sime, chattering about her day at school. The conversation flowed easily, a river of shared stories about patched roofs and reading lists. When the bill arrived, there was no conflict. Amara placed her card on the tray. Junho started to reach for his wallet out of instinct, but he stopped. He looked at her, and she gave him a small, knowing nod. He pulled his hand back and smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and changed his entire face. "Next time is on me," he said. "Deal," she replied. They walked out into the crisp Seoul air, a new kind of family. Junho took Sime's hand on one side, Amara took the other. He was no longer a king isolated on a throne of ice. He was just a man, tethered to the world by 2 hands, finally understanding that true wealth isn't what you own, but the table where you truly belong. Reflective music swells and then fades to a close.